And from there, I'll continue. So before we begin properly, to get you all thinking, I'd love you to pop one word into the chat. So when you think about story time in your setting, what does it look like? Now, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just what springs, first thing that springs into your mind when you think about story time with your little ones. Some great words coming in. I love the connection angle that so many of you are popping in there and the creativity from imagination and things. So, oh, I love that as well. Yeah, sat down snugly, everyone engaging. Um, some lovely answers there, silly. Like that one too. Obviously, story time can be so many different things at different times, depending on what the children are feeling, what the story's about. And this isn't about perfect practice. You know, nothing's perfect in life, but this is about reflective practice. So tonight, hopefully, we'll have a little think about how we read with our children. So, I'm going to move on to some session aims. So, by the end of tonight, I don't want you all to go out tomorrow and read 1,000 more books a day or add more into already full days because I know everybody's very busy and we all spend a lot of time reflecting on lots of different things. But what I do want us to consider is how we can read differently. My hope is that when you leave tonight, you're feeling one of these things: inspired, reassured, more confident, maybe connected with some fellow educators, or maybe you leave with one small idea to try. This session is about small shifts that can create a big impact. So, we're going to explore what interactive reading really means, how our environment can bring stories to life, and how to embed books throughout provision, as well as using reading in everyday moments and partnering with families, because obviously that can have a big impact on how children have a love for reading. Interactive reading isn't an extra, it's the foundation of language, attachment, and thinking. And when we have connection, it has to precede the comprehension. So, moving on to our next slide. Let me paint you two pictures. Picture one. All the children are sat on the carpet in a circle and you're reading a story. Children are fidgeting, they're looking around, they're interrupting, and they're encouraged to sit still by the adult who's reading. Now, imagine picture two. Children are gathered round. Some are sitting, some may be laying on their tummies, one's leaning slightly into you. The book's open, but the pace is slower. You're pausing. A child notices something in the picture. He says, "Oh, you look sad." You stop and you respond. What makes you feel sad? What do you think he's feeling? Another child joins in, and before you know it, someone's predicting what might happen next, someone's making connections to their own experience. You might not even finish the book, but the children are thinking. They're all talking, they're all involved. Now, a story isn't just being delivered, it's being built with the children. Picture two isn't the adult performing the story, it's them partnering with the children on it. An interactive reading turns a book into more of a conversation. It's not always about finishing the story. Sometimes it's about following the child and their interests or where it might turn. The magic often happens in those little pauses. A child's comment often isn't trying to distract from the story itself, it is the story. Books are scripts for connection, they're not performances to be perfect. Children aren't built to sit still. Um, Research into dialogic reading shows that when children are active participants, when they're predicting, when they're questioning, when they're retelling, and their vocabulary and comprehension significantly increase because children are retrieving and applying language. They're not just hearing it. That's all getting soaked in, and they are repeating back with you because children do not learn language by listening alone. They learn it by using it. So I've got another quick interaction. Just pop in the chat. What do children most interrupt during story time? Just from your experience, maybe just with your current cohort, what are your main interruptions? What are the things that they're saying or doing? I'll just give you a couple of seconds to add something in there if you've got anything. Questions yet? Yeah, seeing something on the page I've got, pointing to things, commenting on emotions. So nice. Yeah. Yeah, pointing out details in pictures or spoiling the ending. Yeah, they do like to predict it, especially when it's those familiar stories, isn't it? Noise of animals. That seems to be a common one that's coming up. It seems like a lot of you are seeing very similar things and things like we've just spoken about. Now, that is because children want to be participants in the story. They don't necessarily just want to sit, especially the younger we go, the more active participants they want to be. Now, that might be using sensory books and things like that, but they want to be involved. Obviously, we know that children's attention spans grow as they develop and their age grows. And obviously, that's just a generic, but their attention span is increased by getting involved with the story. I'm just going to move on to our next slide. So, environment. This is something that I feel quite strongly about because within our environment, we want stories to matter. Our environments must show that the books matter. Children shouldn't have to ask permission to access stories. Books should live everywhere, not just in a book corner or just scattered in one little place or having maybe one or two books out. They should be readily available. And when they are, children see them as theirs, and that massively increases their enjoyment and their willingness to go and select books. So, accessibility. For children to be able to access books, they need to be able to be within their reach. So things like having front-facing books can be really beneficial, especially for younger children who might not um, be able to. Sorry, I've just had a message come up. I think Natalie, I think somebody's not had a link come through called Adele. I don't know if you could maybe try and send her a quick link because she's hoping to join, even though she's a bit late. She
No
said she's not
problem. I'll
received.
do that now.
Perfect, thank you. Um, Sorry to interrupt everyone. So front-facing books. Younger children obviously need the visual because as they get older, they might recognize the spine or certain things, especially with familiar ones. But when books are turned facing the children, it's inviting them in. There should always be a minimum of 6 to 10 books available. That might be a range of things like board books, especially when you've got younger ones, because I know when my little ones were younger, pages can get ripped, and I know that can be quite upsetting, especially when you've spent a lot of money on books. Having the option of board books for younger children so that they can always access is really important. And then obviously adding into that provision as and when you feel you can. Having duplicates can be really beneficial because, as I'm sure we know, with all resources, there are sometimes favourites that can cause upset. Obviously, as children get older, we can explore turn taking and things like that. Um, the other thing is looking at rotation without overwhelm. So you might have key favorite stories that you leave out all the time. Our personal favorites here seem to be the Julia Donaldson ones, which I can understand because they are my personal favorites as well. And we have them out all year round. We have the all the Julia Donaldson ones and the Lift the Flap ones as well that are out all the time. And then we have a rotation. So we tend to have things to do with interests and seasons that rotate. We always have certain types of books readily available to do with emotions and other things like that, which I'll discuss in a bit more detail later. If children can't reach books independently, we're limiting the interaction before it's even begun. Now, from a repetition point of view, I'm sure everybody in this chat will have had books at certain times brought to you numerous times through a day, through the week. And repetition for them is not boring, even if we might know that story backwards, upside down, and inside out. But for them, it's building mastery. Repeated reading strengthens those neutral pathways, and familiar stories reduce cognitive load that allow children to focus on deeper meaning and new vocabulary. So, accessibility is not just physical, it's emotional because it is building those pathways. So, you don't need to write anything in, but it's just a quick reflection that I'd like you to have a little think right now about your own setting. How many books are accessible at child height in your setting right now? If you want to put anything in your chat, you can, but it's just more for your own reflection. So, integration into provision. Books shouldn't just live in one corner, as I've said, they should breathe throughout your environment. When children play the story, they internalize it. So I've got a few points on here saying some ideas of where you can sprinkle literacy because it doesn't just have to be storybooks, it can be other printed materials as well. We have cookbooks in our kitchen area, maps with cars, food magazines when we're doing shopping and things, the free ones you can just get from Tesco's and Aldi and various places like that. Having books linked into interests because obviously a child's more likely to engage if they are interested in whatever they're interested in at that moment. And rotate selections as well, just so they do have option to have new books that they've not experienced because there are, for example, the Julia Donaldson ones, which I've said are obviously keen favourites here. I know a lot of parents might have those books at home or a selection of those books, and there's more familiar ones that children might read at home, but it's also important that we're bringing new books in as well. Um, because at the end of the day, we're wanting to create a love and enjoyment for books to last far beyond their early years. And when we do plant that seed, plant that love for books now, it can last them for the rest of their lives. For a bit of depth for the EYFS, obviously interactive reading supports characteristics of effective learning as well as literacy, language, and all the other things. Children are playing and exploring, they're actively learning, and they're critically thinking throughout. So, normalizing bookish play. Bookish play is something I love doing with the children here. When I find that there's a book or an interest or a season that they're really enjoying, I try and add provocations or invitations to play based around whatever it is that they're interested in. And when children are playing a story, they own it. It's okay if the ending changes. We're not protecting the book from children. We're inviting the children into that book. They can reorder things. They can use story props. They can use small world. For example, in the pictures, we've got Play-Doh there. The children absolutely loved recreating the gingerbread men story. They were rolling out the dough. They were making the gingerbread men. They were saying what happened. They were baking. Without even opening a book, they were telling me what was happening. Sometimes you just need that prompt, especially when it's a familiar story, for a child to be reading through their play. Interactive reading also supports the executive function. They've got waiting, they've got turn taking, impulse control in safe, meaningful context. There's just a few examples of some bookish play that we've been exploring on the screen there. One of my personal favorites is the middle picture, where we were exploring owls. So the children have taken a big interest recently in birds. And that had sidetracked onto owls specifically. We'd read some books about owls, which led to them talking about the owl footprints, which obviously then led into the Gruffalo's Child, which, as I've said, Julia Donaldson is a favourite here. We love the Tony box, and children can access that here all the time. They have so many different characters that they can choose. We also sometimes set set it out as a bit of an invitation with something that they're interested in, because then it links to the play that they're doing and they can choose to do that. Often you'll see children putting the Tony Box character on and turning the pages with it. So even if they don't know the words that are on the page, they are reading along with it. They're hearing the story, they're turning the page, and they know that's happening next. And we'd been doing that. The children had been accessing it. They'd been using all the story props to recreate their story. Some of the children had made the Gruffalo, the owl, and the mouse in Play-Doh. And then they moved on to drawing their own picture and saying what was happening. So as you can see on the screen there, a little boy has made what's in the middle is a tree. There's a little black hole in the middle. He'd drawn the owl there. He'd added the mouse down at the bottom and he retold the story and it was beautiful. And again, at that moment in time, he didn't have the book open, but he was retelling the story as he knew it. And he was adding his own little sprinkle in as well. So it's amazing the language and the different things that we can cover, even when we've not got the book open. So, diversity and inclusion. This is quite an important one because obviously we want stories that are reflecting the children in our care as well as expanding their knowledge. So I like to think of it as within our book collections, within our stories, we need three things. So we need mirrors, we need windows, and we need sliding doors. We need children to be able to see themselves. Every child deserves to see themselves in a story, and every child deserves to live and see lives beyond their own. Representation is not an add-on, it's our responsibility. So I think it's really important that everybody that's attending tonight audit your environment. Ask yourself the questions that are on the screen right now. We want them to be accessible. They need to be accessible all year round. There is a big thing about things being tokenistic. So, for example, only having books that reflect different cultures because of something that's going on in that moment. But children deserve to be able to see that all year round. Now, that's not to say, for example, if there is a special holiday, we don't necessarily have Christmas books out all year round. So, but I think it's important that we do have things that reflect different religions, different ways of life, different ways of living. And that goes right down to, for example, in like if you've got a bit of a construction area or if you've got blocks out and things like that, you can have architecture books that show different homes. It doesn't have to necessarily be a story as we know it. But it's just so children have access to that diversity, to see those different things that they might not see. Because I know, particularly where I am, I'm very conscious we're a white British area. Children don't see much diversity. Homes look okay. Well, that one might have different brick. That one might have render. That one, might have a bigger brick, but they're very similar, aren't they? The sort of homes that we see in our areas generally. Um, so I think it's important we represent those throughout our provision. Um, have a little think to yourself. If a child was looking at your book collection right now, would they feel visible? Belonging grows when children see themselves in stories without it being pointed out. Another thing I wanted to mention was about gender stereotypes. So, without knowing it, many people can gender stereotype, and that can often be represented within books. And it's important we have a diverse range to break those stereotypes for the children that we care for. So, having a think about things like, as we were mentioning, construction, builders often are represented with construction vehicles all being male. It's important we represent different people across the areas of provision that we have. It's important that they see different families. It's important that they see dads being nurses and women being doctors and scientists. Now, these things in this day and age are commonplace, aren't they? There's often women doctors, there's often women scientists, but often that can still be not represented in a lot of books. So I think we have to be mindful with the books that we choose to have out for the children as well, because stories can quietly shape what children believe are possible. And we want every child within our care to have the highest expectations for themselves. So, do you know what? If they want to be an astronaut or they want to be a scientist, we don't want any books to hold that in or make them think that, oh, why am I only seeing male scientists? Why have we not got books on women scientists and things like that? And I think it's really important that we reflect on the books that we have available. So, interactive reading in action. So, we have so many ways that we can get active in interactive reading. The most powerful part of a story is often the space between pages and what we can do with it. Sometimes the story can wait, but the moment can't. So if a child is in the need to be active, why don't we all stand up and pretend we're going on the bear hunt? You can get children involved. Children do not have to be sat still for a story. We can add adult language in. We can say, when a child's saying, for example, I know a lot of people had said about animals, oh, dog's sad. We might respond with things like, oh, yes, he does look worried. I wonder what's making him feel anxious, and continue that conversation on. We don't need to just say, oh, yes, and then move on. Sometimes it's important we acknowledge those moments and continue that on. We're not trying to correct, but we're trying to expand. And in doing so, we're also adding more vocabulary that maybe we wouldn't have had in there if we were just reading the words on the page. The way we respond teaches children that their ideas are valuable. We're not trying to test children, but we're trying to grow language with them. So, as I put on the screen, this is where you can bring in things. So, movements, like I said, we can stand up and we can do the bear hunt. And children are more likely to be engaged with that. We can do things like reading Room on the Broom. I've got Room on the Broom here. Um, we love mixing with the cauldron, and we're holding our cauldrons, and everybody picks up their spoon and we've got to mix it. So instead of just reading the part where she's saying mix it putting the pine cones and all the things, we're picking up the objects and we're putting them in ourselves. And although children can't actually see these objects, it gets them using their imagination. It gets them being creative. They're expressing what they're doing there and then. Sensory elements. So we can add in textures, even smells. If there's a story that you can say, um, hand of surprise, for example, you could have fruits readily available so they can be smelling them. You could use cotton wool balls, put them in a little glass jar or a little plastic jar with the lid with some holes in, and get them smelling. What fruit do you think you can smell there? There's all sorts of sensory elements we can bring in. Bear hunt, as we've said, you could have a little sensory path made up. The children could walk through the sensory path. You could have some mud for the children to walk on. You could have some sticks. Acting stories out and having those sensory elements in brings children's engagement in more, and you'll be amazed how much children will expand that learning by adding these additional things in. I also think it's important that we acknowledge that just like us, children have different days. Children have days where they are tired or maybe feeling a bit overwhelmed. And particularly in smaller group sessions, when you're doing smaller group reading, whether you're a childminder with a small group or if you can break off, if a co-childminder, if you've come from a nursery, if you can break off into smaller groups and do these, it allows children to connect more with you. And there will be times where, do you know what? Actually, what everyone needs is just to lay down and listen to the story. You don't even need the pictures, they just need to hear it. There'll be other times where they've got lots of energy and you need to get them up doing those big movements. There'll be other times where, oh, shall we all pull up a blanket and snuggle in? And all the children can cuddle up on the sofa or on the floor with some cushions and some blankets. I think it's important that we follow those children's pace and rhythms. Just going to move on to the next slide. Here's a few examples of some things that the children have been doing. As you can see in the first picture, a child had selected from our readily available books that we have out all year, and they'd gone and got the figures and they were retelling the story themselves. Some other invitations at the bottom, Three Little Pigs, so the children could recreate their own story. They had access to the book, they could make their homes, they could recreate the play. In the top, we were having a little pamper session. We were having a little spa. And the children had access to books. And whilst they were taking turns exploring the different things, the children were picking up books, all to do with connection, and looking at them independently and asking to read them as a small group. And the connection that we had there was beautiful. The zoo invitation at the top shows a small invitation that I'd done when some of the children were quite a bit younger. And again, just having the animals that they could match up with the story kept the children more engaged when they were exploring through play. There we go. So here are some ideas that you could use right away. So a lot of you might do some of these already, but hopefully there's maybe one that you've not considered, or you could maybe think of a different way that we could do it. So, for example, putting familiar books in different with different resources. So again, it might be that you have storybooks such as the Three Little Pigs that you can put out with the bricks. It might be that you have picture books with real life scenes in, like the different homes, so they can explore the construction and see if they can build a home like or a construction like the Eiffel Tower. And as they're looking through, you'll find that that engages more thought and creativity. Puppets is always favorite. Young children especially seem to love puppets. That can be you using the puppet, having it on your hand, to enhance the story, or allowing the children to free access the puppets and they can retell the story that in their own way. Or you might do both. Torches for nighttime play. So we have a light dome. If anyone follows me, you might have seen it. It's just that dome projector. It's amazing for shadow play. However, if you do not have access to a projector, torches work really well as well, and we use them as well. Children have free access to the torches all the time. And you can use props or their hands or different things for the children to explore interactive reading using light and shadow. It is a really good one for exploring other things such as looking at science, how the shadows change as well. So you're not, well, with all these things, you're not just reading. There's so many things that we're going to you'd cover across the EYFS throughout. Introducing story baskets. I love a story basket. I love children to be able to come up to something and use it in their own way. It's especially good for young children. So if you've got babies in your setting or toddlers, having a story basket readily available for them to access has really positive impact. Let children vote on what story to choose. Now, this can be something you could introduce into your daily provision, or you could just do it sporadically. Some people might have a little jar, so you could have some little counters and the children could put them in, or you might do it simple as stand over there if you'd like that one, stand over there. or just getting them to tap the book. But having that democracy and letting children have that decision making in which story is going to be the story of the day or that they're going to explore, that doesn't mean you don't have the other books available, but it does mean that children get to understand democracy and get a say in which ones they'd like. It might be that you do a vote and you end up doing them both anyway, but just the fact that the children have had a vote can be really engaging for them. So, pausing before turning each page and asking questions, even if they're not initiating it, you might randomly tomorrow just say, "Oh, what do you think's happening here?" Or what do you think might happen next? And asking those questions to get children thinking, especially if it's a new book, because they might not know the ending. Or if it is a familiar book, you could get them thinking another way, like, oh, what would happen if, and change something that happened. That's especially good for older children to explore retelling stories and get them thinking about how stories can change. Replacing character names with children's names or letting children create a new ending. My children love it. So every day, at some point in the day, we make up our own story around the children. So today, we have been spending a lot of time in the garden because I don't know if where all you guys have been, if it's been a bit nicer, but oh, it felt like spring was coming. And we even had our coats unzipped. And the children were loving playing in the water and with the sand. And we had the T-Rexes out and a dinosaur book. And all of a sudden, we were characters within this elaborate story with sand mixing and water mixing. And I was the T-Rex that was hungry, ready to eat all the children, which was hilarious for them. And they were telling me what was going to happen, and they were thinking of these new scenarios as they were exploring. Um, different schematic play and all these other things. So just getting the children involved and them being a character can massively expand how they interact with reading and with storytelling. Adding sound effects for every page. So you might have books that have specific sounds on, which children love, don't they? Pressing them. You'll hear them on the repeat till the batteries go. But you can also add in your own. Certain stories more so you can add in different sound effects to do with what objects might do or what sounds the characters might make. But it's also important we consider our tone because if someone's reading to you completely monotone and it's flat and they're just, I want to do this and this happened. Whereas if you're changing your voice and you're adding in big motions and gestures and big pauses, because I think as adults, we can often rush through things. And sometimes children just need that pause between each page, that pause between each sentence to let that sink in. And that can be really effective in keeping children engaged as well because they're thinking and they're thinking, oh, it's adding to the suspense. What's going to happen next? Make it sensory. As I've mentioned previously, there are lots of different ways we can add in sensory play. We can try and entice and enhance all the senses. So there's ways that we can do touch and oh, someone's just put something in the in the chat here, but my chat's just gone. I can't read it. 1 minute. Not a fan of chat GBT, but I did a session recently. It was about making up your own personalized stories the children love. Yes, they do. I can't comment on chat GBT with making up stories, but as I say, I love doing it. I do it, I find myself singing and making up stories all day long, to be perfectly honest. A parent came in the other day and said, my child keeps singing this song, and she was trying to do this song and these words. And she kept saying it on repeat, and she said, oh, she's been doing it for ages. And I was like, no, I don't know. Anyway, a couple of weeks later, I realized it's me, and I sing that song when I'm putting shoes on and stuff, and I didn't even know that I was doing it. So um, I think the more we do it, because if you're not used to doing it, if you're not used to making up stories on your own, or you're not used to singing random songs and making them up, it can be a bit daunting. But if you slowly introduce it, it might just be a couple of sentences. It can make it just that bit more engaging for the children. Um, so where was I? What was I on? Making it sensory. Yeah, you can add in all the sensory elements. I do think it's really important, like I say, that we use all the senses. So if you can invite smells, even if there's not actually anything physical to smell, sometimes it's um or they were breathing in the book, so you can get them. Oh, what can you smell? Can you smell the flowers because they're in a meadow or things like that? So it doesn't necessarily have to be something physical, but you can get them smelling, say, doing deep breaths and saying, "Can you smell this? Can you hear this? What can we hear?" Um, and add them in. Obviously, if you know in advance it's something that the children are interested in, you might have readily available some sensory elements that you might have provided or extended learning with later. But we can try and introduce those sensory elements even from a spontaneous story. And number 10, do big movements with the story. So again, things like The Bear Hunt and these sort of interactive books that we can get children standing up. We can, maybe it's a book with a plane. Children can fly the plane. They've got their arms out, they're flying it. Get the children to act out the scenes. Get them to use their imagination. Get them to pick up the objects. And you'll find that the children will be a lot more engaged and a lot more responsive with that type of interactive reading. Here's a few examples of some provision that we have had here. That I always make sure that any area, any invitation to play throughout my setting has lots of books. So it doesn't matter what their interest is at that moment. It doesn't matter what area they go into. There is always access to books. Because even if they're not necessarily picking up that book there and then, getting that visual, getting that knowledge that books are fun, books are pleasure is a big thing for me because I'm a big reader. I absolutely love reading. My eldest is a big reader and loves reading. And I think that's because when you make reading fun, when you make it inviting, when you have it there and children are regularly seeing books, because some children at home might not regularly see books. It's a sad fact that more and more families are not reading with children. And obviously, I'm sure we're all aware that technology is becoming a bigger thing for all families. And there's nothing wrong with technology. Please don't think that I'm saying using tech. I use it with my own children. But I think it's really important that we still have books. So here's a couple of examples of books throughout the provision that children have accessed. Sometimes it might just be there for children to free access, and they might do. Sometimes we might be doing something like, for example, the one in the middle that says star, they were doing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and we've been exploring stars. I read the star book whilst they were making their stars. They didn't need to be sat doing nothing. They were listening to the facts, and as they were making their own stars out of Play-Doh and their own space scenes, they were listening and absorbing that knowledge. And I knew they'd absorbed it because later, when parents picked up, children were retelling some of the facts that they'd learned in that book. Because we love fact books as well. It's not just about stories. We love learning facts. Da, 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 da. I'll cover a bit more on that in the next session. So I had a person directly ask if I could cover shouting and lift the flap fighting. So obviously, there can be disagreements around who does what, when, and how. There can be loud, because children can be loud, can't they? And as I was saying before about it's really important to read the children and what they're doing because at times they're going to want that quiet, snuggly time, and other times they're going to need those big releases of big energies. Now, it's not a behavior problem, it's a participation problem. So if the children are having those shouting and lift the flap fights, it might be because at that moment they need to be more interactive. Shouting often just means that children are feeling safe enough to participate. And sometimes we need to shape it, not silence it. So it might be that we can get them doing some noises within it. For example, the people that were putting about animals, maybe it's an animal story. Maybe we can get them mooing. Maybe we can get them making those big noises. Um, Obviously, we don't want silent children. We want collaborative participation from children, don't we? That's what interactive reading's all about. We're wanting to give them enthusiasm. Now, obviously, there's executive functions that come into play, impulse control, waiting, emotional regulation, and things. This all develops through practice. Story time is one of the safest places to practice it. It might be that at times we have those conversations ahead of time. So we say, this is going to be a lift the flap story. We're going to take turns in lifting the flap. And sometimes that can be enough. Other times it might be that if we give the child a prop, so everybody's got something to do, even if it's not their turn to lift the flap. They've got something there that's keeping them busy and engaged, even when it's not their turn. Obviously, we need to use our own judgment with the children in that time, our knowledge of the cohort and who's there as to which is the best way to play that. And sometimes, again, it's that duplicates. If you've got duplicate sensory stories, maybe they could be holding another book or holding something that keeps their hands busy. I hope that's covered a bit of that question. If anyone has any questions about that, feel free to shout out, but we can cover it again at the end. I've put a couple of examples there of some things that we've been doing. So puppets, I made sure that everyone had a puppet. There was in that particular story that's just on the chair there, interactive parts within the book. We had discussed prior to it, and the children all got a turn, but they also got to use a puppet. So it kept um, that delay between their turn that little bit easier. As you can see on the tough tray at the right, if it's at the right for you, my right. Um, there is lots of sensory books for children to access. So again, there's not that when a child's wanting to do one, they have access to the others. I'd also put on there some other interactive parts with sensory things on so children could access that whilst we were looking at books. And at the top one we were doing some sensory exploration. So again, there was more things to feel than just the sensory book. Mhm. Reading in everyday moments. So reading doesn't just have to be story time where you might have, obviously, I don't know everyone's routines, but a lot of people might have a specific time of the day that they read a book. And then books readily available as well, or have books readily available in play. But reading in those everyday moments can also soothe, they can prepare, they can regulate and reassure because the right story at the right moment can change a whole child's day. That might mean introducing it into times that maybe you don't have story times usually. Um, I found it's really beneficial to have books with food. So it might be that you have a book to do with food because you're doing food tasting. But we can also introduce books at other times. Maybe you sat having a snack. On the pictures there, you can see we were having a picnic out in the woods, and I was reading a story because we've been looking at birds, and the children were eating, but they were still listening to the story. And it was a really good opportunity where they were engaged in something else, but still listening to what was going on. And again, we made it quite interactive because we were listening to all the things that were going on around us in the woods. Also, having different people. If you are a childminder, you might be a lone worker, but maybe you've got children. Maybe those children could look at books with your mindees. If you are working in a nursery, having different people read different books at different times because everybody reads differently and everybody does things differently. And some people may be naturally more flamboyant and move their hands about or use different tone, or some people might speak softer. And you know what? Sometimes that's what they need too. Just mixing these things up and having different experiences. Maybe you have a partner at home and one day they could read a story. Um, all sorts of different scenarios there, obviously depending on your own circumstances. I'm just going to move the chat because I don't know what else to put on there. Daily routines. So, introducing them in daily routines. We personally do a lot of hygiene things to do and oral health and things like that. And obviously, you'll have your own routines within your day. I'm sure everyone will be flexible with certain things, and some things will be more rigid. Um, yeah, you know that everybody has to eat, so everybody in our setting always brushes their teeth when they're here. So introducing stories during that time can be really good. I found there was a child that is at my setting, but a long time ago, had issues with brushing their teeth at home when they'd just started. And we introduced a book and a song. And the child engaged in brushing their teeth. Parents communicated that they had less issues with doing their toothbrushing at home just from introducing books into those everyday routines. So, supporting families with stories. As we know, our relationship that we have with families is really important because that helps support children's love for stories. So, there are so many different ways that we can try and encourage families to get involved with reading more at home. I've put a few on the screen there. There's also a couple of examples of some home learning bags that I have. These are particularly focused on my older children because they're the ones that I've got readily available to photograph at the moment. But you can do them for younger children as well. Obviously, add in more sensory elements, scale it back a little bit. You can do cards and things that you can add for parents to explore. If you don't have that, because not everybody has the time, the money, or the inclination to make things like that, the simple thing, have a little crate, a little box with a few extra. You might have some extra books. You might see someone giving books away for free and make a little mini lending library. It doesn't have to be some people have these and they're wonderful, you know, an outside sh free access shed, like a community library, which are amazing. I don't have one of them. I would love one, but I do have a crate with books that parents can access and have that lending library. And you'll find you'll get donations if you ask as well, because people get rid of books all the time and it doesn't have to be an expensive thing. I've just seen something else coming in there. The older ones I asked for stories on the night. Oh, that's lovely to hear. Yes, they do interact completely differently. Oh, thanks, Stacey. Hope to see you next time. Um, so we've also shared leaflets and information because parents might not always know the and understand the importance of reading, whereas if we share that with families, that can get them involved. And I've done things like book hunts. So I got some books from the works. You might also be able to do it with donations that you've got, and we wrapped them up and we hid them around the village. And the children had chance to explore some that we had here, and then we went and hid them for other children to encourage other families to search for the books. And we did it on a map. The children marked it off, and everybody could go and search for the books. And we had loads of positive feedback within our community for that, including the families that are within the setting and extended across the whole of our village. So, as a little reflection, what is one small shift you could make tomorrow, next week? Change doesn't need to be dramatic to be powerful. Simple things can have a big impact. Hopefully, some of the things we've discussed tonight will get you reflecting on your provision or the way that we can interact with stories and with children. We don't need new books. You don't need to go out and buy loads of new books, unless obviously maybe you've noticed a gap within your audit. But you might need new noticing. So it's noticing and tuning in with the children and where they're at. Because if stories can come alive indoors through play and interaction, imagine what happens when we expand outside as well, which is something I'm hoping to explore with hopefully all of you or most of you next time. Um, Something just again to reflect on is stories begin in the connection, and connection is where learning grows. It's something that I feel very strongly about. And when we connect with a child, they're more likely to be engaged, they're more likely to interact. And connection is where all learning grows. Thank you. I hope you found this really interesting. Oh, I've just seen Fiona's put she's on her way to do an audit. I do want to ask because I really am very keen to make sure that this is beneficial to you. Does anyone have any questions? Is there anything I've not covered? Is there anything that you thought of that as we've gone along or before we started that might help you or your setting or your provision with how you can do interactive reading? If anyone does, feel free to pop your microphones on, feel free to drop it in the chat if you've got any thoughts. If you want to comment on anything we've discussed or if you've got a question, please do.